What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are finally breaking down Exposition, one of my first kind of tracks that represents my style. I'm really looking forward to this one. There's going to be a lot to break down. I'm sure I'm going to end up rambling for a very long time, but I'm really excited. Exposition is a very meaningful track to me. It was actually made intentionally to be meaningful. So there's going to be a lot about the track that I want to break down, a lot about some of the things that I did that I want to say, and a lot of kind of things to unpack here. Really is the cool thing. So let's get straight into it. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe for more breakdown videos, and let's hop into FL Studio. Alright, now we are back in FL Studio, and there's three things I want to say before we break down this track. Number one, let's talk about arrangement a little bit. Let's talk about how I arrange a few things. I've mentioned in the past that some of the decisions, I guess as far as arrangement goes, are kind of arbitrary, and that's sometimes true, it's sometimes not true. I do like to have things pretty organized. I do like to have things arranged really well, as you can kind of see in this track. But specifically, I talk about some of the ways I name tracks or some of the ways I might arrange things. They can be arbitrary. And if I were to put it, I guess, subjectively, sometimes when I'm in the zone and I'm really focused and I'm really just kind of doing things really quickly, I'll put random names on patterns, and that's kind of the name that it ends up with. Sometimes I need to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more cautious and put, all right, this is, a brass sound, this is a mid bass, this is that. So it really just depends, it fluctuates. And one of the things that maybe you'll see as I break down more patterns is the better I got at producing, the better I got at just kind of getting in that zone, and the more arbitrary my names got. The interesting thing about this track, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, is this was a really hard track to make. So I mean, things are organized very, very clearly, because the more I struggle and the harder I have to work, the more I have to organize things and make sure things are easy to digest. So that's why sometimes the names can be arbitrary and random. Sometimes they're very specific. So you'll see that all throughout my projects. Number two, let's talk about how I named this track. Now I want to do this right off the bat before I forget, because I mentioned when I broke down low that I would talk about how I named low. But I forgot, so I'm going to talk about how I did that for low and for Exposition here. So depending on the track, sometimes there's a name already in mind, sometimes there's a feeling already in mind. Express is definitely that way. But for Exposition, and actually for low, it was just kind of more of a brainstorming session where I sat down and I thought, what do I want to name this track? What would be a good fit for this track? For low, it was pretty easy. So why did I name low? I was just sitting down listening to the track, and after a few, maybe just a minute or two of thinking, I just thought of the word low, and I thought it would be a really good name for the track. And I thought, it really captures what the track is, which is just, give me some bass house, right? Give me something that's, it's deep, it hits you, but it's not super crazy. It's a minimalistic track, as I've said before. So that was how I came up with low. Exposition was another brainstorm session. That one took a lot longer to name. I don't know if it was over the course of a few days. Not that it took me, 48 hours to name the track, but, you sit down for 5 minutes, you got nothing, so you do something else, and you come back and you try to name it again. One of the things I do is whenever when I have some sort of intention on the track, but I don't know what to name it, I just think of a word, think of a feeling, think about what it represents, and then maybe just look up some synonyms for those words, right? I'm not sure exactly where I started with Exposition, but in a way it was meant to be, I know I said this 3 times, this is going to be my 3rd time saying this already, that the Fake ID Tech House remix was my debut single, then I said that Low was my debut single, and now I'm saying that Exposition is my kind of debut. So that was kind of the how I pictured this track as a debut, because as I mentioned before, Low and the Tech House Fake ID, the Fake ID Tech House remix are house tracks, and that's not really my style, right? I mentioned actually in the end of last video that Exposition is really when I start to get to my sound and my style, the sound I want to represent. So long story short, this was also my debut track in a way, but this was me just kind of showing the world what I am, who I can do, and how I want to do it, which is why after some brainstorming and after some kind of little bit of just research on synonyms of words, I ended with Exposition, and I think it's the perfect name for the track. It really just captures exactly what I want it to be, which is kind of an introduction to me and to my style and to my sound. So that's why I named this track Exposition. Again, I think it captures it perfectly. And the third thing I want to talk about is kind of the difficulties I had with this track, because I mentioned it was kind of my debut track in a way. So let's talk about what I mean by that. Now, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, Low and the Fake ID Tech House remix were my house tracks, but I always knew that wasn't the style that I wanted to stick to. I like house, I have fun with house music, But when it comes to the artists that inspired me, it wasn't house artists, and that wasn't actually the music that got me into electronic music in the first place. I'm sure, like many of you, I mean, if you're watching this video, maybe you have some of the same style of music, taste of music that I do. I was inspired by, the artists like Porter Robinson was a huge inspiration for me. He's probably the biggest still to this day. Then you have, Seven Lions, Son Holo, Illenium, and those really melodic, emotional artists that not only got me into electronic music, I guess I'll say actually that not necessarily got me into it, but made me fall in love with electronic music, and that actually got me into producing, right? It was from listening to those artists that really made me want to produce and make some music of my own in the same style, in the emotional and the melodic style. So all that means is that when I was making those house tracks, I always knew they weren't going to be kind of my style, and that something like this would be. So 2 things I want to say about this track. Number 1, about Exposition is I wanted it to represent the sounds that I like in many ways, which is why it's 150 BPM, kind of aiming for a melodic dubstep style. It has, some synth buildups, some heavy basses, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of emotion, a little bit of glitches, a lot of atmospheres. So I really wanted to capture the essence of literally as an exposition of my sound. And that's why this track was made. Now, the third thing that I was supposed to talk about that I got off track on was about the difficulties I had with this track. And the whole reason I mentioned what I just mentioned is because this was my first attempt. Yeah, not necessarily my first attempt, but my first kind of take on really finishing that style of, big supersaws, pads, and this and that. A lot of harmonies, a lot of melodies, and specifically supersaws. It was really hard to get used to the mixing of it all, because if you've listened to Tech House and if the Fake ID Tech House remix and to Low, and if you've seen the breakdowns, they are minimalistic tracks, and I designed them to be minimalistic tracks. This was not meant to be minimalistic at all, so I had I had zero experience mixing all these sounds together, right? Mixing Fake ID Remix and Low was pretty easy because there wasn't a lot to go there. There wasn't a lot going on there, and even if there was, it was just basses and getting that right. I mentioned in Low that mixing those basses was kind of the hard part, but once I got that set, that was pretty much it. Here, I pretty much had to mix everything. And last thing I'll mention before I dive into this breakdown, because I think it's very important, is I actually made a short form video on TikTok about why finishing your tracks is so important. So let me share a little bit about why I believe that with this track, because Exposition took me so long to make. I mean, I think I had it done I released Exposition in the end of 2023, but I mean, I think I had it done probably sometime in the summer, right? Because after I released Slow, I went straight into this track, and maybe I'd started it before. But the point is this: I had it, let's say 90% of the way done in the summer, and I spent all the rest of that time dialing in the mixing because it wasn't really just sounding how I wanted it to sound. And there was a clear reason for that. It was because I didn't have any practice mixing this style. Now, I had made tracks kind of like this in the past with supersaws and melodic elements and things like that. But because I had no intention of releasing them, and I just kind of wanted to make them, I never really dialed in and said, okay, now I need to finish this track and get all the mixing sounding exactly how I want it to sound. So this was my first time mixing all these sounds, right? The sounds that you actually see on this left side right here. A ton of patterns that I'm going to talk about in a second. So the mixing took forever, and part of me wishes that I kind of just spent some time mixing it, called it a day, and then moved on to the next track, which actually in my short form video I talk about maybe that's something that you should consider doing. But again, I had such a hard time with this track because I had no practice mixing all these elements with the intention of I'm going to finish this track as if I were to release it. So if you're watching this and you're kind of in between projects and you're not really releasing anything, and you're using big elements like this and no one else is mixing or mastering your tracks for you, I just really want to emphasize how important it is to be finishing your tracks and to take a stab at actually mixing these sounds, because it's not all that hard to get right. You really just need practice in it. And I actually made another video comparing, even in Express, I made another video comparing Express to Progress, which has, and I'm going to talk about the intention of Progress in a second, or not in a second, but in that video. But comparing the sound quality of Express versus Progress, and those tracks are only a few months apart in creation and completion, but the sound quality is just so different, and the mixing is just so much improved. that, again, it's not like I developed some new strategies or I found a hack or a trick to make the mixing a lot better. It was really all just practice. So that's why I struggle with this track so much, because I had zero practice mixing these sounds. And you might actually notice that in the sound quality of the track. It's not horrible, but it could be a lot better, especially, let's say, if I made it now in 2024, in the middle of 2024. There's just a lot of work that can be done there. But last thing I'll say about that is I actually think there's a nice element to that, because if you listen to any artist's discography who's been in the EDM sphere for long enough, and you go to their oldest tracks, I mean, there's just a very clear difference in the mixing style, in the mixing quality. So I think it's something that every artist needs, right? I heard this track and I knew it wasn't perfect, but I kind of knew that, hey, I'm going to release it. It's not going to be perfect, but this is going to be one of those tracks that you're just going to go back and listen to, and it's not going to be the best mixing wise. Just like I might go to some of my favorite artists and listen to their old tracks and realize that, hey, their mixing has improved a lot, and that's awesome. All right, so let's finally get into the project file. Now, just as a quick overview, something that I've mentioned in the past was that my patterns, let's say, especially in the Fake ID remix breakdown, that there were only a few patterns there, and even in low, there were a few more. And once I get into my actual tracks, I guess I'll call my sound, there's going to be a lot more. So you'll notice a few things. Number one, the amount of patterns here. I mean, the patterns are the essence of every track, and especially EDM tracks. So there's going to be a lot more here, and there's going to be a lot more to break down and a lot of mixing to break down. So I think this is going to be a long video again. Now, we talked about the patterns. Let's talk about this organization here. A lot of automation here. I mean, this is actually a pretty big track now that I'm opening it up again for the first time in months. Actually, not that much. There's only a few things here. A lot of it's effects. You'll see these patterns, a lot of automations. Things are kind of grouped. More automations here. Synths, basses, a few pads here. I guess some leads, and some effects. And as far as mixing, the drums here as well. And as far as mixer tracks goes, we're looking at 64. I actually don't remember using that many mixer tracks. I'm actually surprised I got all the way to 64. But either way, huge jump from where we were last time in low, if you saw that video. In low, I think we ended right around 40 to 50, maybe let's say 45. But, I mean, half of that was effects. Here, I mean, the same amount of tracks we had in low, we have in Exposition and more, and effects. So, I mean, it's just a really big kind of jump from where I was before to where I am in this case now in Exposition, if this were present tense. Which is all the reason more why it was so hard to mix. All right, now let's actually get into the track. Let's start with the intro. So we're at 150 BPM. This is meant to be kind of a melodic dubstep style track. And what does every melodic dubstep track have? Chopped up synths with a filter, with a cutoff being filtered up. Here you hear the cutoff about to come in. So let's talk about this. Now, two things I want to talk about. Number one, again, chosen intentionally because that's just very, very melodic dubstep. And quick side note, maybe somewhat specific to Ophelia Records. I'm a big fan of Ophelia Records. As I mentioned, Seven Lions is one of my inspirations. I really look up to him. And a lot of Ophelia record tracks are known for kind of this super saw that kind of goes up, especially something like this pattern where you have this, I believe it's eighth note super saw. I mean, this is very, very melodic dubstep and very Ophelia. So that was number one, very melodic dubstep, kind of reminiscent of Ophelia Records. And number two, I do want to clarify that this is actually a MIDI loop, right? These chords were MIDI that I found out of. I can't remember which sample pack I found it out of. And just a quick note on MIDI patterns. I mean, everyone has their own take on whether using presets is cheating, whether using MIDI chord progressions is cheating, whether using MIDI melodies is cheating. All I want to say about that is every producer is different, and I actually think there's a lot of creation that can be had when you have someone write the chords, or let's say, yeah, in this case, the chords for you, and you just see what you can do with that. I actually think that kind of how every producer would use the same chords differently, that's where the art comes from, and especially in electronic music. So I have nothing against MIDI patterns. I don't think they're cheating at all. Not just because I use them, but because I do believe that, you know, every producer would have their own way of kind of taking it differently. I mean, I could have chopped this up. I could have pitched it up, pitched it down. I actually think I pitched a few things down here. I could have had these all sustained. I could have changed the rhythm completely. I could have used a completely different preset. I could have had these all the way at the end of the track. So there's a lot of options you can have, and I think that's part of the art of producing. So just because you used a MIDI pattern out of a pack, I don't think that makes the art any less valuable. Anyways, 18 minutes in, and we're only in the intro. So let's move forward. Actually, sorry, one last thing that I want to mention. Now, intention is one of my big characteristics, but that doesn't mean things don't happen on accident. Accidents happen, and sometimes they make this track even better. Real quick side note, if you've ever heard the song Like a G6 by the Cataracts and Dev, and if you don't know, the Cataracts is actually Kashmir. Kashmir produced that track. He mentioned that track was on accident and became a huge hit, right? Not necessarily on accident, but the specific sound he used, he dragged in on accident. So accidents do happen, in my defense. And just real quick, this sub drop was accidentally dragged in. I think I must have accidentally dragged in a sample, put it in there. The sub drop was never there, actually, until I think I dragged it in on accident, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's that sub drop coming from? And I kept it because I really liked how it sounded. And then everything drops, and you get into the intro. Typical melodic dubstep pattern, few hi-hats just for variation, and a few impacts and effects. Some noises to really kind of fill that space, just really establish some ground of a melodic dubstep feel. Again, the drums, this pattern right here that I talked about, that's super melodic dubstep, super Ophelia, and at least in my eyes. You know, some low basses, some more layers for the atmosphere, some brass stabs that add even more space, and some effects here to just kind of, again, establish some ground. It's actually very similar to kind of low, where you have those effects and the plucks and just things where you're really just setting a baseline for what's to come. So we're moving forward here. Drums get dropped, sidechain gets dropped, and the strings come in. Again, as an exposition style track, as something that's meant to show off my sound, I love strings subjectively, and I really like including them in my tracks. I think they have such really good emotion to them. So if this is a track that's meant to be my exposition, definitely going to include some strings. Speaking of exposition, sustain chords. I also really like tracks that have this kind of big sustain moment where there's no drums, but everything just hits at once. It's going to hit a little bit harder over here as well, but moments like these are just something, just a very nice characteristic of tracks that I like, and definitely something that I want to showcase to be a part of my sound. Filter cutoff got opened up. We're looking at some more bass layers here, and this bass effect that we'll probably break down in a second. Sorry, I'm thinking of a different effect. So big moment where everything's hitting you, things get filtered down, and we go into a build-up. Now before we go any further, let's talk about the length of the track, because this is a 5 minute, let's say, 5 minute, 15-second track. It's actually a little bit longer. This is almost a 5 minute, almost a 6 minute track, 5 minutes and about 40 seconds. This whole track was about movement. Now, two things, I really like long tracks. I think long tracks are awesome. They really allow everything to kind of sit, and you really can soak all the sound in, and you can focus on that movement and that progression that I talk so much about. So this movement in this track is very intentional. You have this kind of chopped up chords into the 1/8, into a sustain, back into the 1/8, where after you had this moment, you know something's going to come, but you're back to where you were earlier, not knowing what's going to come next. I mean, it's pretty much the same sound earlier, but because there's that movement there that you went from this to the sustain and then back down. Again, as I mentioned before, if you saw my my DJ mix breakdown, it's like a sine wave. The energy's here, you take it up, you bring it back down, only to take it back up again. So let's listen to this build-up in its entirety so we can really appreciate the drop that's going to come. I'll still talk over it though, because we have this, again, the filter taken down into the 1/8 pattern that we heard earlier, but we know something's going to come next. And then we get, I should have some snares here. Oh, okay, it's down here, it's not in yellow, it's in orange. White noise, few effects. Into that drop. So, before we break down the drop, so one of the things I actually kind of really like about this movement that I described is I've actually noticed that listening back to my tracks, I'm a big fan of minimalistic drops. because one of the things that I do kind of subconsciously include in my tracks is if the movement is there and the track is kind of well patterned out, this snare buildup really does a good job of doing the buildup alone. I mean, you have some noise here. I like to add noise to a lot of my drops as well. But other than that, there's not a lot going on, because with that movement where you had this low energy point right here, and then the snare hits just to really define, it does really nothing else that other than let you know that we're going into something. So the movement is there. So I mean, I do a lot of really minimalistic buildups because of that, for that reason. But of course, with a little bit of noise and that cutoff increasing, back down and then back up, you know what's to come. Now let's listen to the drop just a little bit. If you haven't listened to the track, I'm going to be talking over a lot of things, so this video doesn't last forever, even though it's going to last maybe almost forever. I'm going to be talking over a lot of things, so if you want to listen to it on its own, go ahead and stream it on my Spotify or any platform of your choice, and maybe come back to this video if you haven't done that already. So into the drop. Melodic dubstep pattern. Noise. 3 basses, vocal one shot that takes up a lot of space. This I'm definitely going to break down in a second. Some effects here, more noise, but really this drum pattern is kind of carrying the first half of the drop until we get into these perks with some toms that should be right here. And then it really feels like a melodic dubstep style drop. Really cool effects right here, and a little bit of kind of automation right here. So a lot to take in, and most importantly, as a definition or an exposition, we're going to use those words interchangeably here. That was actually kind of the word I was messing around with when I was trying to kind of name this track, was kind of definition, because I wanted this to define my style and my sound. So as a definition and as an exposition, there's a lot of things that are going on here that you can take as a, hey, this is him, this is Rosendo. Melodic dubstep drums, right? Pretty cool pattern there. A lot of synths, a lot of super saws, maybe even some pads, the pianos there as well. Big basses and a vocal one shot to take up some space. Minimal effects, but effects in the right places. Now I mentioned I was going to break down this vocal one shot right here because I made another video on this on my TikTok. If you haven't seen that, I'm talking about how I made this sound. And actually I am going to break it down again. Now one of the things I like to do whenever I'm kind of lacking some inspiration or maybe don't know exactly what to add, is I like to do something I wouldn't normally do and just take it to an extreme and just have some fun with that. So you'll notice that all of these right here, these are all VSTs, these are all synths, right? Because whenever I think of adding something to my tracks, the first thing I do is I open Spire or Serum. Nowadays it's a lot of Serum. I open Serum and I find a preset and I scroll through some presets. One of the things I don't do all that often that I want to do a little bit more is go through my samples, see if I can find a sample that fits, or maybe even find a sample that's nice, that's a single hit, and make some patterns out of that, make some chords out of that. And that's exactly what I did here. This is actually a vocal because I figured let's have some fun and throw a vocal in there. And I just said, you know what, we're going to make some chords out of it. The vocal probably sits somewhere around here. Actually, it sits all the way up here. Right here. And I took it, 2-3 octaves down where I made the chord. So you get a lot of sustain and a lot of it drags on for a long time. I mean, you hear that lasts a long time, even though this hit is only right here. And then everything goes on. So you do something like that, right? I did something that I would normally never do, which is, I'm not going to say never, but normally I wouldn't do, which is grab a one shot, go through my samples instead of going through my synths. Found that, made some chords out of it, and processed a lot. I mean, processed it pretty heavily just to really give it some unique character to it that I wouldn't do if I hadn't pulled that sample out, that one shot out. Pretty heavy EQ, dropping the lows. I'm not going to say this is right, by the way, because as I mentioned before, yeah, now that I'm going to be going in through some mixing, I want to mention again, I'm not going to say anything I did here is right. There's probably a million things I could have done better because it was my first time mixing this type of track. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things that I did that I probably wouldn't do now, or that I probably wouldn't even recommend you do, just because, I was still new. I was out of practice, so things are probably a little bit rough. In any case, I don't mind this because this was meant to be taking that vocal one shot to the extreme. So pretty high EQ there. I mean, some heavy OTT and some decapitator. Are you kidding me? This is really just meant to really just take that sound and take it to another extreme intentionally. More EQ. This I probably would not have done, but you know, really get those mids in, let those mids shine, almost like a radio. This last EQ is just for automation, and some ozone imaging, probably just for reference. This is the one thing I really struggled with, was being out of phase and trying to get the track to sound good in mono, because I didn't really know a lot about the intricacies of supersaws and how to work around them. In any case, 3 basses here. I'm not really going to go into sound design because I'm not the best at sound design, nor do I kind of do I claim I am. But yeah, 3 basses, main, mid, low, actually 4, a sub, all sent to a bass bus with some processing, some compressors that I absolutely did not know how to use at the time. So I'm even scared to open these up. I have no clue what I did with them. Apparently there's a limiter on here. Actually that must be for sidechain. But again, 3 basses, main, mid, low. Why don't we take a listen to them? Let's see what atrocities I committed here. Yeah, these are all in mono. Something I also want to do now, I probably have this mid bass wider, and also I have a low bass and a sub bass. I wonder why. Let's take a listen. This is already pretty low, but let's not talk about what I could have done better or what I should have done. Let's just take the track for how it is and take a listen. So pretty low bass right here, but maybe a little bit drony. Definitely some mid basses there, and a sub. And actually this low bass is for a different part of the track, so thank God I did not stack 2 sub basses on top of one another. Again, all sent to some mix bus processing, probably high cut, maybe a little bit of mud out right here, so not bad. As far as the synths go, let's take a listen. Main synth that you heard earlier, really why? What preset is this? I might use this more often, I kind of like it. Anyways, main synth. Synth 2 meant to be a little bit higher. Synth 3, which is purely noise, all sent to a synth bus. We also have a piano here. A reverb send, good thing I knew how to use sends at the time. And I also sent my leads into this bus as well. This is actually the vocal one shot, and okay, good. And a soft pad on top of it all. So what it sounds like all together. And why don't we take a listen to the basses all together as well. Now this is what those basses sound like all together. Again, I mean, all in mono. Might have changed that, but I digress. Anyways, let's keep moving forward. I mean, this movement right here is so nice. You get those toms. Again, all without any extra hi-hats or anything. But right here, the sound drops, toms hit. And then you get into the best of it. More effects, more kind of, more of everything. Even this hi-hat comes back. But that's enough about that. Let's move on to the second half of the track. Because after this drop, well, we drop the drums right here, but the hi-hats stay, and then we stay moving forward. Something I do a lot, where we take some of these drop elements, maybe even keep the drums, and keep going. Let that movement take in. Except this time we're actually taking that movement down. We have this filter being automated down, and there's nothing left except a very soft 1/8 chop. Nothing. And again, purely intentional, right? I'll say 2 things. Number 1, if it sounds right, I'm going to do it, right? Even if it's not the most calculated thing in the world. I kind of liked that movement that was there. I kind of liked the fact that we went to that drop and then we took it down, right? And kind of let the track literally breathe, had no sound whatsoever. I liked it, so I did it. And number 2, I do think this is a really good definition of my sound, because as I mentioned, I really like long tracks where it's all about the movement, all about the progression, and all about kind of taking it all in over the course of time. So I think this does a really good job of defining my style, because I'm not afraid to kind of let the track breathe. I'm not here trying to make, pop or, tracks that appeal to the masses. I'm here trying to make something unique, something different. Even if that means having a point where it's completely silent in a song, I'm okay with that. And if I'm okay with that, and I'm trying to make a track that defines my sound, and it kind of has and kind of is an exposition into who I am as an artist, why not include it as well? So again, very intentional. Even if it was just I liked how it sounded and I decided to keep it quiet, there was intention behind it. So I mean, this track breathes for 2:59, 3, 6 seconds there, a long time. And then we start very soft. soft piano there. Nice atmospheres here that actually fill up quite a bit of space and add some good ambience to the sound. But you'll hear in a second that it does not last long because that's not the point. The point is to have some movement, some progression, and define a style. So we get some really cool new sounds here. These choir stabs are really cool. Let's take a look at this. Okay, this is really cool. I might use this more often. I really should start. I wish you could favorite presets in Serum. If anyone knows how to favorite things in Serum, let me know because that would be awesome. I know you can do Inspire, and I started doing that. I don't know if there's a way to do it in Serum though. Anyways, you get the strings again. You get that kind of chord and that choir stab, and you actually get some staccato strings. Awesome, more strings. As a definition of my style, you can't have enough strings. New bass as well. You actually heard this bass effect over here. Just a little bit, but over here it takes up more space and adds some really cool stuff. You also get a Reese as well. I'm a big fan of Reese basses. So instead of going through every individual thing in here, I mean, you have the piano, you have some plugs, some effects, and all this stuff. Just take this moment for what it is, which is just not completely, but changing it up quite a bit, introducing a ton of new elements, and getting you into a new emotion, a new feeling that you hadn't felt earlier in the track, right? With these strings, with these choir stabs, with the Reese bass, right? It's a completely new emotion. I even panned the bass because I wanted to do something crazy, even though this is usually a big no-no. But also you have some leads, and these leads are important because it makes the track, makes the track kind of stick out a little bit more, especially the super saws, I'll say, because these leads weren't there before. And it sounds a lot better with the leads because they take up some good space, hopefully in the middle if I mix this correctly. But again, it really adds a new dynamic to the track because the track actually sounds more full, especially with two things. These leads, maybe this pluck as well, these leads and this bass effect that takes up a lot of really nice space. So all in all, this is like a completely different section of the track. Over here where it's all about movement and defining some sounds, here we're really getting into the kind of the feel of the song and of the sounds that I used. Really cool audio effect here as well. Before we get into the next build up, let's go into it. So we're into the build-up again. You hear the Reese here, you hear that snare build-up. You hear the filter, the main synth you heard earlier that wasn't in here before, but now it's back in, and naturally that filter cutoff is going to open for the build-up. Albeit with one caveat. It's actually not a drop. And of course, if you've listened to this track, you knew it, and you're probably like, what is he talking about? There's no drop here. But I mentioned earlier that moments like these, where there's no drums, but everything's kind of in your face, I really like those moments, and I just had to include it again. But with more, right, with these more leads, with some more movement where you take away the sound completely and add an effect with some automation. Just have some fun and really just get creative there with all the sounds that you have going on. But in any case, again, I really like these moments where everything's in your face, no drums. I think a perfect example, by the way, is Bloom by Throttle, where kind of in that second drop, rather not drop, but when that build-up hits, so I'll say when that build-up's coming in and then all the synths kind of get in your face. I really like moments like that, so I included another one in this track. Even this is kind of like a mini moment, right? There's tracks like this. There's moments like these all the time in Express. Release kind of has a moment like this, but this is kind of on a different kind of wavelength because you get a build up into this moment, so it really hits differently, and I'll say harder. Again, things got dropped. Let's take a listen to this one more time because it's not just everything in your face, but you have the drop, you have the automation, you get some choir stabs here to add some variation. This is also very, very intentional right here, where I automate these synths in a very kind of, I'll say, sporadic way, almost I want to say crazy way, because I included some bass effects here. And this moment is really actually intentional and important because my style isn't just melodic and very emotional. I'm a fan of bass music as well. And I'm not opposed to making bass music in the future. Even right now, I'm working on some slightly more bass-heavy drum and bass tracks. And I would totally be fine with making like a full-on dubstep track. There's actually kind of a half dubstep track I'm working on right now that'll be out later this year. So there's a little bit of a teaser for those of you watching this video. But again, this moment is just so nice because with all this emotion and all this feeling that you're getting, this is just a reminder that as a definition, as an exposition, I'm including some bass elements in there, right? This kind of really heavy bass effect with some, some weird automations on the synth. Just a reminder that I like bass music too, and don't be surprised if that's a part of my sound as well. And now we get into the actual buildup. Plucks are in, more white noise. That apparently stops halfway through. I wonder if I moved this recently on accident. I hope I didn't export it like that. And drop. Right, now we have everything. Now we have the perks all the way there. We have this bass effect that, actually, no we don't. But we have the leads here. And we should even be doubling up on sounds here. Something's not right. There should be an extra effect right here. I know I made some tweak here to these effects, but it probably just wasn't notable enough for me to remember. So we're just going to pretend like the last minute never happened. In any case, tom fill in, and there's your drop for you. So with all that emotion, how do you end the track if you're really trying to define your style? Nothing crazy here. Brass stabs come in, which is something you didn't really hear earlier because they were over here, but they were pretty much overshadowed by everything else. So it's almost like an entirely new sound that also adds some really nice feel to it. It adds like an almost I don't know how to describe it. I would even say it's an indescribable feeling that you get when you listen to some tracks that really kind of put you in a setting, that puts you in a mood, almost like a very emotional, dark, kind of a futuristic style, a futuristic mood that I really like. So as a definition of my sound, there you go. You got these basses here. I even dropped this mid bass to really let that low bass kick in at the end with some atmospheres. But these brass stabs were kind of the main player into making sorry, not the brass stabs actually. My apologies. This it's actually this atmosphere that does the carrying of that feeling. So that's kind of the main player in the outro. Plus these brass stabs, that same thing applies though, you didn't hear earlier, so now they're kind of there to sound new and sound different. With some effects to kind of cap it all off. White noise down. And that is Exposition. Now I could talk about patterning forever, and I'm going to say I already did talk about patterning forever, so I don't want to spend too much time breaking down these sounds. I mean, I broke down the important stuff, which is kind of these mid basses. There's not a lot of drums going on here to break down, but it's really just bass and synth heavy, and some atmospheres here and there. These are probably worth breaking down, but nothing you haven't heard. You hear these in the track. And same thing with these effects. I'm not going to break down these effects because you hear them in the track, and even if you can't hear them, you can see them if you're watching this breakdown, right? You can see where they are. You can kind of see what's going on when you listen to this track. But even with these atmospheres, right? Atmospheres here, you kind of know what to expect instead of kind of wanting the sound design breakdown, because again, I'm not really a big sound design person. If you wanted sound design, go watch some AU5, which is a huge inspiration of mine. So shout out to AU5. It's actually where I got this from. But that's about the track. So real quick recap, you had all these patterns here. You got some leads that I included at the end that, again, I'm not going to talk about what I should have done instead, but take the track for what it is. However, I probably should have included some leads in the earlier. I digress. You have some basses, some subs. I actually messed around with the basses quite a bit. You hear a low bass here. Low bass gets taken away. You get some new ones. You get the sub here. Main bass, bass effects, a reach instead of the low over here. So there's a lot of variation there. Again, these vocal chops are pretty unique and pretty interesting. You also have some pads, some atmospheres that I really like to use to define the mood that I was going for as another definition of my style and my sound, and a ton of effects. And as far as the synths goes, I mean, this main lead kind of carries it all. You have extra synths in the drop, these choir stabs that do a really good job, along with these strings in the second half of the drop that also do a really good job of changing the sound and defining the mood. And other than that, I would say that's probably about it. Again, 64 mixer tracks here. So that's what we're looking at with Exposition. Now, as normal, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this track. I'm going to keep doing these breakdown videos. they're going to probably get longer. They might not be as long as Exposition because Exposition was super, super intentional and there's a lot to unpack here. Something like Express still has its intention behind it, but in a very different way. So I'll talk about that. Maybe it'll still be long. Again, I like to be super descriptive and detailed in everything I talk about. So if you stuck to the end, big shout out to you. Thank you again. Make sure to like and subscribe for more breakdown videos. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll catch you guys next time.